Today, we're diving into what is, without a doubt, the greatest tragedy in American history. We're talking about a conflict that took more American lives than any other. It was a war that really pitted two different worlds against each other. You had the past versus the future, the farm against the factory, the South against the North. So, how on earth did it all happen?
To really get a sense of just how catastrophic this was, start with this number, 3%. That was the slice of the entire U.S. population that died in this war. We're talking over 1 million casualties. I mean, it was just a staggering, almost unimaginable price to pay, and it left a scar on the nation that is never fully healed.
Look, this was so much more than just a bunch of battles. The Civil War was the brutal, bloody crucible that would forge the modern United States. It was literally a fight for the soul of the country, and the outcome would define what it meant to be an American for centuries.
So, how did it get to this point? Well, to get it, you've got to rewind the clock to 1860. The United States wasn't very united at all. In reality, it was two completely different countries sharing a map, each with its own economy, its own politics, and its own vision for the future.
And you can see the split right here. I mean, these two regions couldn't have been on more different tracks. You had the North, booming with industry, wanting tariffs to protect its factories, and becoming more and more against slavery. And then you had the South, an economy based almost entirely on agriculture, specifically cotton, which wanted free trade and was built top to bottom on the institution of slavery. This wasn't just a disagreement, it was a fundamental clash of worlds. And at the heart of it all, slavery. That was the one issue where there was just no middle ground.
For decades, these tensions had been simmering, They'd slap on a compromise here and there, but those were just band-aids on a deep, festering wound. And then came 1860. A single presidential election that finally pushed the nation right over the edge. There was no coming back.
So this guy, Abraham Lincoln, gets elected president. Now his main platform wasn't to end slavery everywhere, not yet. It was to stop it from spreading into new territories. But for the slaveholding states, that was it, the final straw. They saw the writing on the wall, and they didn't even wait for Lincoln to take office. They started leaving the Union one by one, and by February of 1861, they'd made it official, forming their own country, the Confederate States of America. War wasn't just likely anymore, it was inevitable.
And make no mistake, this was not some fringe movement. This was a powerful, coordinated break. South Carolina went first, and then, boom, 6 other states from the Deep South followed right behind them. They created the first version of the Confederacy, a solid bloc dead set on preserving their way of life, and, most of all, the institution of slavery. The country was officially broken.
Now, if you were a betting person back then, looking at this whole thing on paper, you would have said this war would be over in a few months. The Union had so many advantages, it looked like a total mismatch.
I mean, just look at these numbers. They're wild. The Union had more than double the people, 18.5 million, to the South's 9 million. And get this, of that 9 million in the South, 3.5 million were enslaved people who obviously weren't fighting for the Confederacy. The North had pretty much all the factories to make guns and supplies. It had the entire U.S. Navy. The Confederacy had farms. That's about it.
But the Confederacy had an ace up its sleeve. They had something the North didn't, or I should say, someone. His name was Robert E. Lee. The man was a military genius, plain and simple. The kind of general people would study for the next 150 years. He was the great equalizer. He was the reason this lopsiding fight turned into a long, brutal war. And boy, did Lee deliver. In the early years, he and his generals handed the bigger, better-equipped Union armies one shocking defeat after another. I mean, at places like Bull Run and Chancellorsville, you had his much smaller army just running circles around a Union force that was sometimes twice its size. These wins sent shockwaves through the North and made everyone realize, uh-oh, this is not going to be a quick fight.
So for 2 long, bloody years, the war was basically a stalemate. The South, feeling pretty confident after all its victories, decided to risk it all. Lee was going to invade the North for a second time. This massive gamble set the stage for one single week in the summer of 1863 that was going to change everything.
And here it is, the week that sealed the Confederacy's fate. From July 1st to the 3rd, Lee's invasion hits a brick wall at a little town in Pennsylvania called Gettysburg. It's the bloodiest battle of the entire war, a catastrophic defeat for the South,
And then, at almost the exact same time, on July 4th, hundreds of miles away, the crucial Confederate fortress of Vicksburg on the Mississippi River finally surrenders. It was a devastating 1-2 punch from which the South would never recover.
If you want to really feel the disaster at Gettysburg, just look at this number. On the final day, in a last-ditch effort called Pickett's Charge, 14,000 Confederate soldiers were ordered to cross a wide-open field. Of those 14,000 men, only about 150 actually made it to the Union line. It was an absolute slaughter. This was the high watermark of the Confederacy. From this moment on, it was all downhill.
Okay, so after Gettysburg and Vicksburg, the whole game changes. The North finally has a realization, wait a minute, we don't need to be brilliant. We don't have to out-general Robert E. Lee. We just have to outlast him. They decided to turn the war into a grim, simple math problem.
And that's when they unleashed a strategy of total war. It was brutal, but it was incredibly effective. The Navy tightened its blockade, slowly starving the Southern economy. Armies in the West, led by generals like Sherman, just tore through the Confederate heartland, destroying railroads, farms, everything. And in the East, General Ulysses S. Grant just relentlessly hammered Lee's army, knowing he could replace his own casualties while Lee couldn't.
This is what you call a war of attrition. The goal is simple. Just bleed your enemy dry until they have absolutely nothing left to fight with. And with its huge population and all its factories, time was now the Union's greatest weapon. The Confederacy was just running out of everything: men, supplies, food, and maybe most importantly, hope. And then, finally, it was over. On April 9th, 1865, with his army surrounded and basically destroyed, Robert E. Lee surrendered. But in one of history's most tragic twists, just 5 days later, President Lincoln, the man who held the country together, was assassinated. The nation's greatest triumph was immediately followed by one of its deepest tragedies.
So the fighting stops. But the war's impact? Oh, that was just getting started. This conflict didn't just save the Union. It completely remade the United States, leaving scars that are still visible today, but also forging a completely new nation.
The Union's victory was carved into the Constitution itself with 3 massive changes. First, the 13th Amendment. Slavery is abolished. Period. Gone. Then the 14th, which is huge. It establishes birthright citizenship and guarantees equal protection under the law. And the 15th, which says you can't deny someone the right to vote based on their race. Now, making these a reality would be another struggle, but together they laid out a brand new blueprint for American freedom.
So why was the death toll just so horrifyingly high? Well, a huge reason was this deadly mismatch. You had generals using tactics from the 18th century, lining guys up shoulder to shoulder and marching them across an open field. But the problem was, the technology had leaped forward. Those soldiers were walking into repeating rifles, early machine guns, and much deadlier artillery. It was a recipe for industrial-scale slaughter and a dark preview of the wars to come.
Which brings us to the final, haunting question. When you look back at how deep the divisions were, how all the compromises failed, and how central the issue of slavery was to everything, could this tragedy have actually been avoided? Or was this brutal, bloody conflict the only way for the United States to finally be reborn? That's a question historians are still fiercely debating today.